It was one of those chilly autumn evenings where the air had a slight bite to it, like it was reminding you that winter wasn't far behind. The moon was just starting to rise, casting a soft, silvery glow over the clearing where the packs had gathered. Am I making the right decision? The thought slipped into my mind as I fastened the necklace Andrian had given me. Tonight was supposed to be perfect. My engagement night. My engagement to Andrian, the soon-to-be alpha, has been set since we were kids. Today is the day. All my childhood dreams are supposed to come true. The dress, the celebration, the whole pack gathering. It's all happening. Our parents were on seventh heaven. We were perfect couples. I'm Olivia, a 22-year-old werewolf. I am born a healer. My mom says I carry our generation tradition of ancient healing since birth. It is the grace of Moon Goddess. I am fearless and independent, and Andrian. He was every bit the future alpha should be. Calm, rational, tall, broad shoulders, sharp jawline, his dark hair always perfectly in place. He is everything a woman wants in her partner. Growing up, Andrian and I had always been together. We'd been best friends, playmates, and future partners in every sense of the word. When we were kids, I'd always insisted on playing the queen to his king whenever we acted out stories of pack leaders. I wouldn't let any of the other girls even think about taking my place. But that was when we were kids. Back when the idea of being his queen was just a game. Now, standing here on the cusp of that becoming my reality, the idea of spending my life with him, no matter how loyal or strong or perfect he was, felt stifling. I loved Andrian, sure, but it wasn't the kind of love that made my skin tingle or pick up my heartbeat. It wasn't the kind of love I'd read about in stories, or the kind I'd always secretly hoped for. The bond we shared felt more like a deep friendship, a brother-sister closeness, not mates. And yet, here I was, standing on the edge of it all, staring at the scene before me. I dressed myself with robe. It was beautiful, sure. Flowing silver and green silk, embroidered with the ancient symbols of our pack, but it felt heavy on my shoulders. Like the weight of tradition itself was sewn into every stitch. I'd worn it for Andrian, for our families, for the packs. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I was wearing it for me. Before I can respond, there's a knock on the door, and one of the pack's elders steps in. It's time, Olivia. I swallow hard and nod, standing up. The robe falls back into place, hugging my shoulders. Elena, my friend, gives my hand a squeeze before she heads out. I follow behind her, feeling the weight of every step. The ceremony is beautiful, of course. Andrian stands at the front, looking as steady and calm as ever. His broad shoulders fill out his dark coat, and his hair is slicked back. I catch his eyes for a moment, and he gives me this small smile. It's a smile that says, everything's under control. But that's the problem. Everything is under control, including our relationship. We exchange vows, or rather, promises about the pack and duty. Nothing romantic, nothing intimate. It's all business, all expectations. Andrian squeezes my hand, and for a second, I think maybe I should just go along with it. Maybe this is as good as it gets. After exchanging engagement rings, the ceremony flowed into dinner. The warm glow of firelight bathed the gathering as the scent of roasted meat and herbs filled the air. Laughter and quiet conversation wove through the crowd, plates clinking softly against the wooden tables. Suddenly, a distant howl echoed through the forest, sharp and haunting. The sound froze everyone in place. Utensils paused midair, and only the fire flickered in response. One by one, people turned their heads toward the direction of the sound, their gazes trained on the spot where the howl had originated. The wolves circling the perimeter of the ceremony had also stopped in their tracks, a lone wolf, staggering into the clearing, his body slouched with exhaustion and covered in dirt and blood. His clothes were torn, hanging loosely off his muscular frame. Dark hair fell messily over his forehead as he stumbled, barely keeping himself upright. He was tall, muscular, his chest heaving with each labored breath, and as he took another step forward, he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The crowd murmured, some of the warriors already on their feet, ready to protect the pack. But I stepped forward, my healer's instinct kicking in before I could think twice. "Wait!" I called out, rushing toward him. I knelt beside, placing my fingers gently on his wounded neck. His pulse was faint but steady. Whoever he wasn't a threat right now. He was broken. "Andrian," I said, glancing up at my fiancé, who had moved to stand protectively behind me. "He needs help," I said. Andrian hesitated for a moment, his eyes narrowing at the stranger before he nodded curtly. "Take him to the healer's quarters." I watching as the warriors lifted the lone wolf and carried him away. Later that night, after the excitement of the ceremony faded, I found myself standing outside the healer's quarters. Andrian had left to deal with pack matters, as usual. It was always his priority. He was always busy and a kind of person who seems difficult to talk to. I understood that. It was who he was, a leader through and through. But still, a part of me felt left behind. But I couldn't stop thinking about the lone wolf. Who was he? Where had he come from? Quietly, I stepped inside the healer's cabin. The room was dimly lit, the scent of herbs and medicine filling the air. The lone wolf lay on a cot, his chest rising and falling steadily now. I moved closer, his eyes half open, and for a moment, our gazes locked. His eyes were a deep, dark brown, almost black, and they held a fierceness I hadn't expected. But beneath that fierceness, I saw the pain and emptiness as he has been alone for centuries. Who are you?" His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "I'm Olivia," I said softly. I said, gently mixing the healing balm. "You're safe now." He tried to sit up, but I gently pressed him back down. "You need to rest," I said, my voice firm but kind. I carefully applied the medicinal herbs in his wounds. He didn't fight me, but his eyes never left mine. "Why are you helping me?" I blinked, taken aback by the question. "Because you needed help." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the suspicion in his eyes. He wasn't used to kindness, at least not the kind that came without a price. "My name's Ivan," he said finally, in a low tone. Ivan. The name sent a tingle through me, though I wasn't sure why. There was something about him, something dangerous and magnetic, that I couldn't quite place. "Ivan," I repeated. "Where did you come from?" I asked softly. He didn't answer right away, his eyes drifting toward the ceiling. "Nowhere important." I frowned, but I didn't push. Instead, I stood, turning to leave him to rest. But before I could take a step, his hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. His grip was strong, but not painful. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft, almost vulnerable. I nodded, a strange warmth spreading through me. "Get some rest." Saying this, I walked out of the cabin. The cool air brushed against my skin as I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling. No matter how much I tried to distract myself, my mind kept replaying every word he said, every glance we exchanged. I felt a sudden pull towards Ivan, a kind of pull that I never felt before, neither for Andrian. My heart was heavy with questions. It was early in the morning when I made my way toward the healer's quarters. The sun was just beginning to break over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow over the trees. The air was still cool, and the quiet hum of the pack waking up created a peaceful rhythm around me. But my heart, on the other hand, was anything but calm. I hadn't been able to get Ivan out of my head. Something about him was different. There was a depth to him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I told myself I was only checking on his wound, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. The door creaked softly as I stepped into the small, dimly lit room. The smell of herbs and ointments filled the space, mixing with the earthy scent of Ivan. He was lying on the cot, his bare chest still bandaged from the deep gash he had when he arrived. He looked up as I entered, his eyes dark and guarded, but there was a flicker of surprise when he saw me.
"Olivia,"
he murmured, his voice rough but steady.
"I wasn't expecting you."
"I just wanted to see how you were healing," I replied, trying to sound casual, though I could feel my heart thumping. I sat down on the edge of the cot, close enough to see the tension in his muscles. Even though he was still weak, there was a raw strength about him, something untamed. I could sense it, and it sent a quiet thrill through me.
"I'm fine,"
he said, wincing slightly. Clearly not fine, but I can manage. He grunted. Just then, the door opened again, and Andrian stepped in. The room seemed to shrink as soon as he entered. His presence was always so commanding, like the very air bent around him. The soldiers who stood nearby straightened immediately, whispering among themselves about their future alpha. Ivan, even though clearly still in pain, tried to sit up out of respect.
"Rest. You're not fully healed,"
Andrian said.
"It's healing,"
Ivan said softly, his voice quieter now.
"Thank you for letting me stay."
Andrian nodded, but there was an edge to his stance, a tension that radiated through the room. I knew he didn't trust Ivan. Lone wolves were dangerous, unpredictable. They had no loyalty to any pack. Andrian had always been cautious, always thinking of the safety of everyone around him.
"We'll keep an eye on you until you're fully healed,"
Andrian said, his eyes hard.
"But don't get too comfortable. We still don't know what brought you here,"
he said in a sharp tone. Ivan met his gaze, unflinching.
"I don't plan on staying longer than I have to."
Then, Andrian's gaze shifted to mine, expression softening just a bit.
"Olivia,"
he said.
"You're too kind, always taking care of the pack. But for now, we have a meeting with the ministers. I need you to come with me. My future mate."
His words were meant to be reassuring, but they landed heavy between us. Ivan's eyes flickered with recognition. I glanced at Ivan and left with Andrian. As the conversation unfolded, I could feel the tension in the air. Andrian discussed the council's stance on Ivan's presence.
"We need to be cautious. We can't have someone unvetted in our territory. They're notorious for stirring trouble."
Andrian said concern about the pack.
"But what if he's not here for trouble?"
A minister interjected, trying to keep his voice steady. "What if he just needs help? We can't turn our backs on someone in need, Andrian." The ministers were gathering, and I could see them whispering among themselves. Their voices carried the weight of authority, filled with both caution and curiosity. After a few tense moments, one of the ministers finally spoke up. "Let's offer Ivan temporary refuge until we can learn more about his story. We don't want to repeat past mistakes." Andrian sighed, running a hand through his hair.
"Fine. But we should keep a close eye on him."
The ministers nodded in support. Chapter 3. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a soft, silvery light over the trees as I made my way to the healer's quarters again. The air was cool, a gentle breeze brushing against my skin. I hugged the basket of food closer to my chest, my fingers absent-mindedly tracing the woven handle. I told myself this was just another visit, just a way to check on Ivan's progress. But deep down, I knew there was something more pulling me toward him. It had become a routine. Every night, after the pack had settled down and Andrian had gone to his meetings, I'd sneak away, bringing Ivan food, a few herbs, and sometimes just company. It was strange, this connection we shared. It was unspoken, magnetic, and the more time I spent with him, the more I felt it growing. He was dangerous, no doubt about that. A rogue, a lone wolf who didn't follow the rules of the pack. But there was something else beneath his rough exterior, something softer, almost vulnerable. It called to me in a way I couldn't explain, like a wild side of me that had been quietly sleeping for too long. I opened the door quietly, the creak of the wood barely audible. The fire in the corner crackled softly, casting a warm glow over the room. Ivan lay on the cot, his eyes closed, but I could tell by the slight twitch of his fingers that he was awake. He always seemed to know when I was near, like he could feel my presence before he even saw me. He didn't say anything as I walked in, but he didn't have to. There was a quiet understanding between us now, something unspoken but powerful. I handed him a small bowl of food, and he took it without a word. We sat there in silence for a while, the sounds of the night drifting in through the window.
You shouldn't be here,
Ivan finally said, his voice low and rough.
Yeah, I just came to see if you need something else,
I said softly. Ivan didn't say anything, he kept staring at me. As I sat beside him to apply the herbal medicine, he spoke finally.
I'm not like Andrian,
Ivan said quietly, his voice almost a growl.
I'm not safe.
I ignored the warning in his voice. I was getting used to it by now, the way he tried to push me away even as something between us pulled us closer. I pulled out the small jar of herbal ointment and walked over to his side. Let me see, I said, my voice quieter now, more serious. He didn't argue, just pulled his shirt over his head, revealing the bandages wrapped tightly around his chest. My fingers brushed against his skin as I untied the cloth, and I could feel the warmth of him beneath my touch. His skin was rough, marked with scars from battles I hadn't asked him about yet, but I knew they were there, stories he wasn't ready to tell. I dipped my fingers into the ointment and gently began to rub it over his wound. It's late afternoon. The air smells like pine and wood smoke, the scent of home. The packs looked at me as if they all could sense the storm brewing inside me. Sitting on the porch of the cabin, staring out at the trees, my mind racing in circles. Ivan's out there, somewhere, and I should be focused on the pack, on Andrian. But all I can think about is him. I pull my sweater tighter around me, hoping the warmth will drown out the uncertainty gnawing at my chest. Andrian's been watching me. He hasn't said anything outright, but I feel it. The tension in his voice, the way he stared me for a long time, like he's trying to figure me out. I can't blame him. I've changed, and I know he feels it too. Andrian was everything I was supposed to want. Stable, dependable, the perfect mate on paper. Everyone in the pack thought so. But lately, every time I looked at him, all I could think was how perfect seemed so far from what my heart craved. What did stability even mean if it left me feeling hollow inside? But Ivan, there's something about him. He's like the forest, wild, unpredictable, and a little dangerous. Whenever I'm around him, it's like something inside me wakes up, like I've been asleep all this time and didn't even know it. I visited him for another few days in secret, bringing food, checking his wounds, listening to the short pieces of his past he'd let slip. I could see longing in his eyes, but he didn't talk much, or even come closer. But one night, after I had rubbed herbal medicine into the cuts on his chest, I realized I was too close to him, and I felt his hand gently graze mine. His skin was warm beneath my touch, and before I could pull away,
He caught my wrist, his grip firm but not forceful.
Olivia.
His voice was low, almost a growl. I tried to pull away, but then he pulled me closer fiercely and said, I tried to stay distant, but I couldn't. And our lips met in a kiss so intense. His lips were rough but tender, like he was holding back a storm. Every part of me burned. I wanted to stop, to push him away and remind myself that this was wrong. I had a duty to Andrian, a role in the pack. But the truth was, I didn't want to stop. I'd never felt anything like it before. This raw, uncontrollable passion that scared the hell out of me, but also made me feel alive in a way I never had. Ivan, I whispered, trying to steady myself as I broke away for a moment, my breath shaky. We can't. But instead of backing off, he kissed me more fiercely, like he was staking a claim. His hands were on my waist, pulling me into his lap, and I could feel every inch of him, hard and warm beneath me. It was like my whole body was on fire, and I couldn't control it. Finally, I pushed harder, breaking free, panting as I stood, backing away from him. I can't, I said, my voice shaking. I shouldn't. He didn't follow. He just sat there, watching me with those intense eyes. I could clearly see pain in his eyes. Stop visiting me, he said in a rougher tone, his voice gruff. You should stay away from me. I'm dangerous, Olivia. I've got a past you don't want to be a part of. I have enemies, ones that could put you and your pack at risk. But even as he said it, I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted me as much as I wanted him. I said nothing, just walked away from the room. One night, Andrian asked me to go for a walk along the edge of the woods. As we were walking, Andrian stopped abruptly. You're distracted, Liv, he said, his voice unusually sharp. What's going on? I swallowed hard, trying to play it off. I've just been tired, Andrian. There's a lot happening with the pack and— Don't lie to me, he cut in, his jaw tight. It's him, isn't it? That rogue, Ivan. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He knew. Of course he knew. I couldn't even look him in the eyes. Andrian, it's not what you think, I started. But even I didn't believe my own words. It was exactly what he thought. Do you love him? His question was quiet, but the hurt behind it was deafening. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. Because the truth was, I didn't know. I knew what I felt for Ivan was different than anything I'd ever felt before. But love? Was that what it was? Or was it just the thrill of something which was forbidden? Andrian turned away, his shoulders slumping, and I could see the hurt in the way he held himself. I thought we had something, he said quietly. I thought we were meant to be mates. The weight of his words hit me hard, and he wasn't wrong. We were supposed to be meant for each other. That's what everyone expected. That's what I had always expected. But what if what's meant to be isn't enough? I'm sorry, I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. I'm so sorry. The tension came to a head a few days later. Andrian confronted Ivan one night near the edge of the pack's land. I wasn't there, but I heard about it afterward. The way they nearly tore into each other. Andrian accusing Ivan of trying to steal me, and Ivan, for the first time, not backing down. The pack was in turmoil. Andrian's steady leadership had been a rock for so long, but now, with me caught between him and Ivan, even the elders were growing restless. They called for a council meeting, pressuring me to move forward with the mating ceremony with Andrian. They said it was what was best for the future of the pack, but my heart was screaming at me to run, to break free, to find Ivan and never look back. Because as much as I hated to admit it, I wasn't the same Olivia anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing after all. Few days later, Andrian called Ivan in front of the ministers and me. The tension in the room was suffocating. I stood frozen between Andrian and Ivan, my heart pounding as Andrian's voice cut through the silence.
Ivan,
Andrian said, his eyes sharp with jealousy.
Fight me for dominance. Settle this once and for all.
He challenged. I stepped forward, desperate. Andrian, don't. This isn't the way. Neither of them looked at me. Ivan's voice was calm, too calm.
If that's what you want, I accept.
I tried again, my voice shaking. Stop! Please don't do this! But it was too late. They moved outside, the pack gathering, whispers spreading like wildfire. The fight was brutal. Andrian fought with everything he had, his skill sharp. But Ivan was relentless, pure power. I stood at the edge of the clearing, the cool night air clinging to my skin like a second layer of uncertainty. The moon hung low, casting an eerie glow over the scene unfolding before me. My heart was pounding in my chest, caught between two very different rhythms. Andrian's steady, predictable beat, and Ivan's wild, untamed pulse. They stood across from each other, tension thick as fog, their eyes locked in a silent battle before the first blow even landed. I couldn't breathe. Andrian, stop this! My voice cracked, desperate to reach him before he did something neither of us could take back. His jaw tightened, his gaze hardening as if my words were nothing more than a breeze brushing past his ears. Ivan, though, glanced my way, just for a moment. And in that single second, I saw something raw flicker across his face. Concern, maybe guilt. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the steely resolve of a man who knew he had nothing left to lose.
Olivia, you need to stay back,
Andrian growled, not even turning his head to look at me. His tone was laced with frustration, his body coiled tight like a spring about to snap.
Andrian, please.
My voice softened, pleading. This isn't the way. But he wasn't listening. He never did when his pride was on the line. And then it began. Fists flew, bodies collided, and the sound of skin slamming against skin echoed through the clearing. The pack watched in stunned silence, their breath held as the fight raged on. My breath caught in my throat every time Ivan's fist connected with Andrian, and I could feel the crowd's tension like static in the air. Because Ivan wasn't just dangerous, he was controlled, and that made him 1,000 times more lethal. I could hear the crowd's breath catch as Ivan threw Andrian to the ground, pinning him with an arm across his throat. For a moment, I thought it was over, that Ivan would finish it. But then, to my shock, he let go. He stood up and stepped back, his chest heaving with the effort it took to stop himself. My hands trembled as I stood frozen, and gazed at Andrian with fierce and said,
I could finish this at once.
Voice steady.
But I'm not like you.
He didn't go for the finish, didn't push for dominance the way everyone standing there knew he could have. Rather, he let Andrian stand. The crowd began to murmur. Ivan didn't want to win this way. He glanced at me one more time, and then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Andrian broken and the crowd in stunned silence. The whispers began immediately.
Ivan's stronger than him. He could have easily finished him.
Andrian stood there, panting, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, the sting of the fight still lingering on his face, and his pride. I moved toward him, instinct guiding my steps. Andrian looked at me. His eyes were dark with anger. I could see his pain and fierce like. The foundation we'd built for years have been cracked. Later that night, after everyone had dispersed, I found myself alone. The fire in my cabin flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the walls. I wrapped my arms around myself. I heard a knock at the door, soft but persistent. My heart jumped. I opened it to find Ivan standing there, his face shadowed by the moonlight. He looked tired due to the fight.
"Olivia,"
he said, his voice low and rough.
"I shouldn't be here."
He sighed at me with those intense eyes, running a hand through his dark hair, the lines of his face hardening.
"The truth is, I'm dangerous. I've been hunted for years, and the people after me, they won't stop. If I stay, they'll find me, and they'll destroy everything you care about, your pack, your people."
I was devastated by the news. I had to decide what I want, the safety of my people or Ivan to stay with me. My enemies would be closing in soon, and by staying, I would risk everyone in danger. He looked at me, like he was trying to memorize every detail of my face, and said, "I am leaving soon." And saying this, he slowly stepped outside. I was left with an impossible choice. I could stay with Andrian, the man I have known for my entire life, who offers me stability, safety, and a future as leader of the pack. Or I could follow Ivan, the rogue wolf who awakens my wild side, who represents danger, passion, and the unknown. I found Andrian near the old oak tree, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. The look on his face was enough to break anyone's heart. The air between us felt heavy, like the moment before a storm. I knew what I had to tell him wouldn't make things easier, but he deserved to know the truth. "Andrian," I began, my voice softer than I intended. "We need to talk." He glanced at me, his brow furrowed. "What?" "That you love Ivan." I said, "Yes, I do. But this is something bigger than this," I said softly. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "There's something coming. Something dangerous. It's not just rumors anymore. Ivan, he's been running from them for years, and now they're getting close. Too close." His face hardened at the mention of Ivan's name, but he stayed quiet, waiting for me to continue. "They're after him," I said, stepping closer. "If they find him here, they'll come for the pack, for all of us. Andrian, we'll all be at risk." "So what do you want, Liv? We can't keep him anymore, I guess," Andrian said in a rougher tone. "Yeah, I just wanted to tell you that I am leaving with him." "You're choosing him, aren't you?" His voice was quiet, not accusatory, just resigned, like he already knew the answer. I took a deep breath, feeling the sting of tears threatening to spill over. "Andrian, you've always been there for me. You're everything I should want in a partner. But..." My voice cracked, and I bit my lip, trying to find the words. "But my heart, it's not yours to keep. It belongs to him." He didn't say anything right away, and for a moment, I thought maybe he'd just walk away without another word. But then he let out a long, shaky breath and turned to look at me, his eyes glistening in the moonlight.
"Olivia, I've loved you for as long as I can remember. And I thought one day you'd love me the way I love you."
My chest tightened at his words, guilt mixing with the ache of knowing I was hurting him. "I do love you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "But not in the way you deserve." Andrian ran a hand through his hair, his jaw clenching as he struggled to hold himself together. "I guess I've always known, deep down. I could see it in your eyes when you looked at him. There was something different, something I could never be." I shook my head, blinking back the tears. "It's not about you not being enough. You're more than enough. You're steady, dependable, everything I should want. But with Ivan, I paused, searching for the right words. With him, it's like there's this fire inside me that I can't control. It's dangerous, but it's also exciting. He makes me feel alive in a way I can't explain. He let out a bitter laugh, though there was no malice in it. Sounds like I never stood a chance. Andrian, don't say that, I pleaded, stepping closer to him. You've always had a place in my life. You always will. But not in your heart, he finished for me, his voice soft. I get it, Olivia. I do. He took a deep breath and met my eyes, the sadness in his gaze piercing. I just want you to be happy, even if it's not with me. A single tear escaped, trailing down my cheek, and I quickly wiped it away. You will be happy, Andrian. You'll find someone who can love you the way you deserve. I know you will. He gave me a small, sad smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Maybe one day. He looked away, staring at the trees as if they held the answers to questions he didn't want to ask. But for now, I think it's best if I let you go. The finality in his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. There was nothing more to say, no words that could make this easier. So I did the only thing I could. I walked away, leaving behind the man who had always been my safe place. Before I could reach Ivan, he was already gone. I made my way through the woods, searching for him, the cool night air biting at my skin. My feet carried me to the place where I knew Ivan would be, right at the edge of our territory, always on the brink of leaving, of disappearing. I found him there, crouched by his worn-out bag, his head hanging low. He looked like he was waiting for something, or maybe someone. And when he heard me approach, he slowly stood, turning to face me. His eyes met mine, filled with that familiar mixture of longing and regret. Olivia, you shouldn't be here, he said, his voice rough and tired. I'm leaving. I know, I replied, taking a few steps closer. And I'm coming with you. His brow furrowed, confusion crossing his face. What? No, you can't. You need to stay here. Stay safe. I don't want safe, Ivan, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. I want you. He shook his head, backing away slightly, as if the weight of my words was too much to handle. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what's waiting for us out there. If you come with me, there's no going back. I know, I whispered, taking another step toward him. And I don't care. I'd rather face the danger with you than live a life without passion. Ivan ran a hand through his dark hair, his frustration evident. Olivia, you don't understand. My past, it's a nightmare. I've been hunted for years. These people, they won't stop. They'll come after you. They'll destroy everything just to get to me. I don't care, I said, more forcefully this time. I'm not afraid. Not when it comes to you. He stared at me, his jaw clenched, torn between the life he wanted to give me and the one he was terrified of. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you. I stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of silver in his eyes. Let me decide what you deserve. For a long moment, Ivan just looked at me, his face softening as he realized I wasn't going to change my mind. The tension in his shoulders eased, and he exhaled deeply, like he was finally giving in. You're impossible. You know that? He muttered, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I shrugged, grinning despite everything. Yeah, I've been told that before. Ivan took my hand, his touch gentle, but there was a fire between us, something raw and electric. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, sending a shiver down my spine.
"If you're coming with me,"
he said, his voice low,
"there's no turning back."
I met his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wouldn't have it any other way.
And with that, we left. Together. Stepping into the unknown, into the wild, untamed future that lay ahead. The path was uncertain, dangerous even, but it didn't matter. As long as we had each other, nothing else did. The moon shone brightly above us, watching as we disappeared into the night, two souls bound by love and the thrill of what was to come.